I'd love to see more thought, because that's what makes another existence possible.
Should culture free itself from the seduction of words and thought? And I will let Steve Taylor start, and I'm tough on time, Steve. So.
Okay, I'll bear that in mind. Good morning, everybody. I'm on the side of Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, which sounds a bit pretentious, but I disagree with Descartes. Again, that's something I thought I'd never say. But I think the kind of self which is associated with thinking is a kind of superficial, even illusory type of self. I think our real authentic self, or a more authentic self, more essential self, emerges when we stop thinking, in moments when our mind is quiet and empty. But it's important to bear in mind, I think, you can, broadly speaking, you can differentiate between two different types of thinking. There is what you could call rational, conscious thought, which you use to evaluate things, to critically analyze things. We use it to plan, to decide, to organize, and so forth. And that's obviously a great tool. It's a great, it's one of the great advantages of being human, that we can use this conscious thought. But unfortunately, I don't think much of our thought is actually of that type. I think probably 95% of thought, well, maybe I'm talking about my own mind here, this is obviously the one I know best. 95% of our thinking tends to be kind of random, associational, involuntary chatter. It's the kind of the stream of consciousness, you could call it. It tends to focus on the future, the past, daydreams about alternate realities, and it stops us being present, and it creates a kind of filter that stands between us and reality, like a fog of abstraction, which stops us really experiencing the world around us. It can stop us really communicating with one another, because there's so much sort of random chatter in our minds that we don't really communicate fully, or we're not really present to other people. So it would be great if we could increase the amount of rational conscious thought we have and decrease the amount of chatter that we have. Also, this chatter tends to gravitate towards negative things, tends to gravitate towards worries, problems, resentments. It tends to inflate them, so it can cause quite a lot of discord in our lives. And I think most of the really happy moments, the happiest moments in our lives arise when we stop thinking. In psychology, there's a concept called flow that you've probably heard of, which is when our minds are intensely absorbed in an activity and the stimulation of activity, and our minds become very quiet. There's a sense of energetic fullness within us, a sense of energy, a sense of well-being, and also meditation. Meditation, the very aim of many types of meditation is to empty the mind, to stop thinking. And when we do that, we feel this marvelous kind of rich energy inside of this marvelous fullness of being. So it would be great if thinking could be a tool that we sort of pick up when we need it. And when we don't need it, we can put it down again and enjoy a kind of a mental emptiness, mental quietness, which would give us a more authentic and essential sense of identity.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And then Miranda Keeling.
Hi. So as an actor, I found myself kind of writing a script. But it's interesting what you just said about flow, because that's what I'm going to start with. And I'd like to kind of second a lot of what you said. So as an artist, I know really well the feeling of being in flow. When that happens, all thoughts kind of fall away, and it's an indescribable feeling that it happens, especially when I'm creating something, so a story or some writing or a recording. And I've experienced this feeling of being in flow, not just when I'm creating something, so in terms of culture, but also when I'm swimming or doing yoga or listening to music. And on stage, I've felt the flow of energy from an audience, and I've thrown it back at them, all before we've had a moment to even form a thought. And it's a wonderful experience. And some people call this flow God, and some people call it something else, and some people have no idea what it is, right? But when I meditate, as you mentioned, meditation, I reach a similar place where I'm resting with the contents of my mind. And I notice my thoughts, but importantly, I'm not pulled along by them. I can sense the space kind of underneath my thoughts, the emptiness, and I can rest there. And it can feel blissful. So there is an enormous amount of benefit in being without thought, especially while creating art, which is culture. However, there is still a place for thought. I used to work in improvised theatre. I was in a company of 4 actors, and we used to have to go on stage every night and improvise 2 plays with an interval in between, an hour long each. And before each show, the audience would vote on who we were and where we were. So they might say, you're 3 bridesmaids and a bride in a kitchen. And then the director would come back and tell us, and we'd look through our costumes and put something relevant on and come out and improvise this play. So the reason I tell you about this is that improvised theatre is an extreme form of present culture. What happens every night is brand new. It's happening right now and it can never be repeated. But there were rules, and some of you might be familiar with the rules of improvisation, accept what's offered, that kind of thing. And those rules have been considered and devised over a long time, and they work. My background before acting was in circus and magic and escapology, and they all require, dexterity and quick thinking, quick reactions. And they also require hours of practice and thought. The magician Tommy Cooper, I don't know if you know Tommy Cooper, but he had this signature kind of comedy magic act. And he put huge amounts of thought into producing what looked like a chaotic off-the-cuff character. So there is a freedom away from the seduction of thought. And when you dip your paintbrush into paint and you splash it against the canvas, that's a relinquishing of control. And artistically, it's really valuable. But thought enables us to communicate and to create collectively and to learn from our mistakes and successes and to plan our next piece of work. Thought is often what enables those producing culture to enjoy the thoughtlessness of being in flow.
Thank you. And Andy, what do you have?
So should culture avoid the seduction of words and thought? I think we should make words and thought more seductive than they are at the moment. There's an experience I had earlier this year in February, which has really stuck with me. I was in a women's prison where I'd been teaching for a while, and I had a relatively new class, and I was filling up my whiteboard with the theory of moral consequentialism, this idea that an action is good or bad depending on the outcomes that it has, rather than depending on a religious framework, or whether because of some system of reason and ideas. I was explaining this theory of consequentialism, and one of the women in the class just had this huge grin on her face, and I was kind of aware of it. I was a bit distracted by it, but I was kind of carried on anyway in earnest, kind of explaining this theory, and then she just started laughing. And I said, "What's up?" Her name was Ari. And I said, "What's up?" And she said, "So people actually sit down and write out all this kind of stuff about what makes something good or bad?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's kind of what philosophers do. That's the study of philosophy. That's the practice of philosophy." And she just laughed again and said, "But so you're telling me they actually do that, like, as a thing?" And she said, "Isn't it just like childhood, though, that kind of makes you who you are, and like where you're born, and then that's kind of just how you turn out to be?" And I found it really moving, actually, that kind of almost like naked confession of like fatalism and determinism. And obviously that had been perhaps part of her life, the fact that she'd ended up in prison. It also kind of made sense given the kind of layer of society she was in. Prisons are not a world that are touched by good sense most of the time. I think we all know, most of society know, most politicians know, most policymakers know what would make that world better, what would improve it. They know which ideas work, they know which ideas don't work, but the actual public will or political courage to actually make those improvements just don't happen. So it's not a surprise that in that setting, big ideas become quite literally laughable. But, I sort of carried on in earnest with Ari, and we had a great 3 months together, and I think she really enjoyed the class. I suppose my feeling with a student like that is it doesn't have to be this way. And, there is a history in the working class of of education and ideas and thought and intellectual enrichment, what got called the mutual improvement societies that you'd have, where mill workers or factory workers would gather together and pool resources to build libraries and teach each other bits they'd learned from politics, literature, art, ethics, what was called bettering yourself. I think those movements were the things that gave rise to the labour movement, that they were part of a sort of organised working class. They didn't come out of philanthropy, that those libraries weren't given from above, they weren't state funded. And so what I want is more of that those kind of movements couldn't really exist today in the age of the 0 hours contract and in the age of the Uber driver and in the age where certain companies make it illegal for you to join unions. But I suppose when I think of this question of culture, should culture avoid the seduction of thought? What do we mean by culture? Are we talking capital C culture, or are we talking society in general? And I think in society in general, I'd love to see more thought, because that's what makes another existence possible. That's what makes, if you can think, if you can imagine another possible existence for yourself, then that's what can free you. One of the things that can free you from the kind of fatalism that Ari had.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.